My name is Eleanor Hayes, and the night I saw my husband throw something into the lake was the night I stopped believing I knew him at all. It was late, too late for David to be outside. I'd gotten up to close the curtains when I saw him through the window standing at the edge of the dock. The moonlight hit the water just right, silver and still, and there he was, my husband of 40 years holding a small metal box in his hands. At first I thought it was one of his old tackle boxes, but then I saw the way his shoulders trembled. He looked around, checked the shadows, and then with a sudden desperate motion he threw the box into the lake. It hit the water with a hollow clang before vanishing beneath the surface. He stayed there for a while, staring at the ripples until they disappeared. Then he turned back toward the house. I stepped away from the window before he saw me. My heart was racing so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. David wasn't the kind of man who hid things, or at least, that's what I'd always believed. When he came inside, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a book open in front of me. He didn't notice the tremor in my hands. "You're up late," he said. I couldn't sleep. He nodded, setting his boots by the door. "Just clearing out some junk from the shed." "In the middle of the night." He gave me a tired half smile. "Couldn't sleep either." I wanted to ask what he'd thrown, but something in his face stopped me. He looked fragile, almost frightened. David had been a police officer for 30 years, the kind of man who never showed weakness. Seeing him like that chilled me more than the night air. When he went to bed, I stayed up staring out the window toward the lake. It was calm again, like nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the image of that splash. The next morning, David was gone before sunrise. He left a note on the counter, went to town for supplies, back later. I stepped outside. The dock was slick with dew. I walked to the end of it, peering down into the dark water. Something inside me whispered that whatever he'd thrown didn't belong there. As I turned to head back, I heard a faint whine coming from the shed. When I opened the door, Charlie, our golden retriever, bolted out, tail low, whimpering. Someone had locked him in. Around his neck was a collar I didn't recognize, brown leather, old, worn, smooth. There was a tag hanging from it. I picked it up expecting to see Charlie's name. But it read L. Harper. I stood there frozen. I didn't know any L. Harper. And the way the name was engraved, careful, deliberate, made it clear this tag wasn't new. That evening when David came home, I was waiting for him in the kitchen. I held up the tag. "Where did this come from?" He blinked, caught off guard. "What's that?" "It was on Charlie's collar. I found him locked in the shed." David frowned. "Must have been some old tag from the toolbox. Probably got mixed up." "Old tag from who?" He rubbed his neck. "I don't remember. Maybe one of my old cases. Don't make something of it." But I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes before he looked away. That night, he barely spoke at dinner. I didn't either. We sat there, two people pretending the silence was ordinary. When he finally went upstairs, I slipped into the shed again. There was nothing unusual except for muddy footprints near the workbench and a thin line of lake water across the floorboards. The next day, while he was out, I went to his office. David kept everything organized the way cops do, files labeled, drawers locked. I found a small brass key in the pocket of his jacket hanging by the door. My hands were trembling as I tried it on the desk drawer. It turned with a soft click. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Old, folded, yellowed with age. The first one I opened was written in a woman's hand. "My dearest David, I can't keep living like this. You promised you'd tell her. Please, before it's too late." I turned the page over. It was signed, Lydia Harper. The initials on the dog tag. I read another, "You said we'd start fresh once she found out. I believed you. Don't make me regret loving you." My vision blurred. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. The dates were from the early 1980s, long before Michael, our son, was born. I heard David's truck pull into the driveway and shoved the letters back high, locking the drawer again. When he came in, I was standing by the sink pretending to rinse dishes. He glanced at me. "Everything all right?" I forced a smile. Of course. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me longer than usual. Then he said almost too casually, "You've been in my office?" The air went cold. Why would I? No reason. He smiled faintly. Just asking. We didn't say another word. That night, when he fell asleep, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling. I kept hearing that splash, the sound of metal sinking into dark water. Who was Lydia Harper? What had David promised her? And what was in that box he'd tried so hard to hide? I looked at Charlie curled up at the foot of the bed, the strange collar lying beside him. Whatever truth waited beneath that lake, I knew it wasn't going to stay buried forever. The next morning, fog clung to the lake like a shroud. The air smelled of wet pine and cold metal. I stood on the dock staring at the water where David had thrown the box. From up close, the surface seemed darker, thicker somehow, as if it were hiding something. I told myself it was madness to look for it. But 40 years of marriage teaches you to trust your gut, and mine was screaming that whatever he'd buried down there mattered. I went back to the shed and grabbed the long garden rake. Charlie followed me, tail wagging uncertainly, his nose pressed to the boards of the dock. "Stay back," I said, though my voice shook. I knelt down and dipped the rake into the water. At first there was only the resistance of mud. Then something solid scraped against the metal. I hooked it, pulled, slipped, tried again. When it finally came loose, it rose with a sucking sound and a rush of bubbles that broke the lake's calm surface. It was a box, small metal and rusted around the edges. I dragged it onto the dock, coughing from the effort. Charlie barked once, then went quiet. I stared at the thing for what felt like minutes, afraid to touch it. When I finally did, my fingers left prints on the damp metal. The latch was stiff, but it opened. Inside were papers swollen and warped by water. A photograph clung to the lid. I peeled it free. A young woman with long dark hair, her arm wrapped around a man in uniform. David. The man I'd married, smiling a smile I hadn't seen in decades. On the back, in delicate blue ink, David and Lydia Lakewood, 1983. My breath caught. Lydia Harper. The papers beneath the photo were police reports, some almost illegible. I could still read bits: incident, drowning, investigation, suspended. The last page was written by hand in David's blocky script. Case closed by internal review. No foul play determined. I sat back hard, the dock groaning beneath me. David had been there. He'd written that report. When I looked up, I saw his reflection in the water. He was standing on the shore watching me. "What are you doing?" he asked. I froze. "I might ask you the same thing." He walked toward me slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. "You shouldn't have touched that." "What is this, David?" I demanded. "Why would you throw it away?" His face crumpled for just a moment before he said, "Because I should have done it 40 years ago." I stood the box between us. Who was she? "Someone I failed," he said quietly. "Someone I loved." The words sliced through me. "You loved her." I thought I did. Before you. Before I knew what it meant to live with the weight of it. He rubbed his face, eyes glistening. She was my partner. We were working a corruption case, bad cops, dirty money, worse people. Lydia found out too much. I told her we'd go to the chief together. He paused, staring out at the lake. She didn't make it that far. I said nothing. She met a sergeant by the water one night, Fowler. I was supposed to back her up. By the time I got there, they were fighting. She slipped on the rocks. I tried to pull her out. I swear I tried. But the current was too strong. The lake was silent except for the faint lap of water against the dock. They called it an accident, he went on, and I let them. Fowler was promoted. I left the force not long after. I kept her letters, her badge, that locket, everything. I couldn't let go. Until now, I said. He nodded. Until Leah came. The name hit me like a blow. Leah. She showed up last week. Said she was Lydia's daughter. She wanted to talk about that night. I told her she had the wrong man. My throat tightened. And the box? She said she knew I was lying. I panicked. I thought if I got rid of it, it would all end. I stared at him, this man I'd built a life with, realizing how little I truly knew. You thought throwing it in a lake would make the past disappear. He sighed. It wasn't just guilt. It was fear. If the truth came out, it wouldn't just destroy me, it'd destroy you too. I stepped closer. What destroys a marriage faster, David? The truth, or 40 years of lies? He looked at me weary and defeated. You don't have to understand, Ellie. No, I said, but I deserve to know. He hesitated, then nodded. She wasn't just my partner. She was pregnant. The world tilted. You're telling me. She never told anyone, not even me, until that night. His voice broke. When she fell, I thought maybe if I'd been faster. I sank down onto the dock, the box between us. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. So this Leah? He nodded. She's her daughter. My daughter. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stared at the photo again, the young woman and the man beside her. They looked happy, careless, untouched by consequence. When I finally found my voice, it came out hollow. You should have told me. He closed his eyes. Every day I wanted to, and every day I couldn't. I picked up the locket from the box and held it out to him. She deserves to be remembered, but not like this. He didn't take it. Where is she now? I asked. The girl, Leah. He hesitated. In town, probably. She said she'd come back. Then we'll tell her together. He looked up sharply. Ellie. No more hiding, I said. If she's your daughter, she deserves the truth. He stared at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. All right. We stood there, both of us, staring at the water that had kept his secret for decades. As we turned back toward the house, Charlie trotted ahead, the old tag still hanging from his collar. It jingled softly in the morning air. And though I didn't know how the next day would unfold, I knew this much. The lake had given back what it was never meant to keep. Leah Harper came to our doorstep on a gray afternoon when the sky looked ready to break. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that reminded me of someone I couldn't quite name until I realized who. They were David's eyes. She stood on the porch, clutching a worn folder against her chest. When I opened the door, she hesitated. You're Mrs. Hayes. Yes, I said, my voice guarded. I'm sorry to come unannounced. She looked down as if gathering courage. I'm looking for David Hayes. He's here. When David stepped into view, his face drained of color. Leah, he whispered. The sound of her name in his voice felt like a fracture in the air. She didn't flinch, didn't move closer. So it's true, she said. You remember me? He nodded slowly. I do. She glanced at me, her tone sharpening. And she doesn't. No, I said, but I do now. We stood there, three people bound by a secret that had finally surfaced. I invited her in, though part of me wanted to slam the door and lock it forever. We sat around the kitchen table. Leah placed the folder down carefully. These are copies of my mother's case files, she said. The police ruled her death an accident. I've spent 10 years trying to prove otherwise. David's hands clenched together. You shouldn't have to carry that burden. Someone has to, Leah said quietly. You were there, weren't you? He didn't answer. She leaned forward. I found your name on an old report. You signed it saying there was no foul play. You lied. David's breath came shallow. I did what I thought would protect her. Protect her, Leah's voice cracked. She's dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stared at David, waiting for him to say something, anything that would make sense, but he just sat there staring at the table. Finally, I spoke. He told me what happened. About Lydia. About that night. Leah looked at me, her anger flickering into something softer, sadder. Then you know. I know she loved him, I said, and that love ruined them both. Leah's eyes shimmered. She wasn't the kind of woman who scared easily. She was strong, brave, but she trusted the wrong man. David flinched. You have every right to hate me. I don't hate you, Leah said, her voice trembling. I just want the truth. All of it. He finally looked up. The truth is, I should have saved her. But I froze. When she fell, I went in after her. But it was too late. Fowler said no one would believe it wasn't an accident. He threatened to ruin me, ruin your mother's name. So I signed the report. I told myself it was mercy. Leah stared at him silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "You lived." She didn't. Mercy for who? David's lips trembled. For no one, I suppose. I reached out, resting a hand on the table between us. "Leah," I said softly, "I found the box. In the lake." Her eyes widened. The box. It had her photo, her badge, the reports. He threw it in, but I pulled it out. She exhaled shakily. "I thought he'd destroyed everything." "I almost did," David said. "But Ellie wouldn't let me." Leah's gaze moved between us, and for the first time I saw something fragile flicker behind her guarded expression. Hope, maybe, or exhaustion. "I'm not here for revenge," she said quietly. "I just want her story told right. People think she drowned. They don't know she was fighting for something." David's voice was rough. "She was. She wanted to expose Fowler. I have her notes, her evidence. I can help you finish what she started." Leah blinked back tears. "Why now?" He looked at me before answering. "Because the truth finally caught up with me. We spent hours at that table piecing together Lydia's life from the fragments David had kept hidden. There were reports, names, photographs, most of them useless now, but some still sharp enough to matter. Leah asked questions like a professional investigator, jotting notes in a small notebook. Every so often, her hand would tremble and she'd pause to breathe. Watching her, I felt something shift inside me. I'd expected to resent her. Instead, I saw the same grief that had hollowed me out for years mirrored in her. When the rain began to fall outside, I made tea. The room smelled of lemon and paper and something older regret maybe. Leah studied an old photo of her mother in uniform. "She looked so young," she whispered. "She was," David said. "Too young to die." Leah traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. "She used to sing when she was nervous. I didn't remember her voice until a few years ago, but sometimes I still hear it when I can't sleep." "What did she sing?" I asked. "Landslide." "Fleetwood Mac." She smiled faintly. She said it was about starting over. For a while, no one spoke. The rain drummed softly on the windows. Then Leah turned to me. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm sorry if my being here hurts you." I shook my head. "It doesn't. It hurts that it took this long." David reached for my hand, but I didn't take it. Leah closed the folder and stood. "I'm going to the sheriff tomorrow. It's time this was made right." David nodded. "I'll come with you." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "All right." When she left, the rain had stopped. The lake outside was calm again, as if it hadn't swallowed a secret for 40 years. David lingered by the door, watching her car disappear down the road. "She looks like her mother," he said quietly. "She does," I replied, "and she deserved to know her father." He turned to me. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "No, but I don't know who you are anymore." That night, I lay awake listening to the quiet house, the steady tick of the clock, and the faint hum of the wind through the pines. In all our years together, David had always been the one who believed in truth and order. Now he was the reason I no longer believed in either. But as I stared out toward the lake, one thought wouldn't leave me. Perhaps some truths were meant to rise no matter how deep we try to bury them. The morning after Leah's visit, the house felt heavier than it ever had. I woke before dawn and sat at the kitchen table staring at the folder she left behind. Inside were pieces of a life that had been erased: police memos, photographs, scribbled notes in Lydia's handwriting. Some of the ink had faded, but her determination was still there, written between every line. When David came downstairs, he looked 10 years older. His hair was damp from the shower, his uniform shirt untucked. He hadn't worn it in years, but now he had it on again, creased, worn at the sleeves, a ghost of the man he used to be. "You're really going to the sheriff?" I asked. He nodded. "It's time." I poured him coffee, though neither of us touched it. "And what happens after?" He looked at the steam curling from the mug. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." We sat in silence. Outside, the sun rose pale and cold over the lake. When Leah arrived, she looked calm, composed. She wore a gray coat and carried the same folder pressed against her chest. She didn't greet me with words, just a faint nod. "I'm ready," she said to David. He hesitated. "Before we go, there's something I want you to see." He led us to the living room. From behind the bookshelf, he pulled a small wooden box, the kind that once held medals or keepsakes. Inside were two objects: Lydia's silver locket and a photograph of her standing beside a cruiser, smiling under the sun. "I kept them," David said quietly. "Not to hide her, but because I couldn't bear to forget." Leah picked up the locket, turning it over in her hand. "Why did you keep it locked away?" "Because every time I saw it, I remembered what I didn't do." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Leah said softly, "She forgave you, you know." He looked up sharply. "How could she?" Leah smiled faintly. "Because she loved you. Even in her last letter, she wrote that she didn't want you to carry her death forever. She said love meant letting someone live." David's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve that kind of forgiveness." Leah shook her head. "None of us do. But we take it anyway, because it's the only thing that lets us move forward." He nodded slowly, his hand brushing over the photo. "Then maybe it's time I tried." We drove into town together. The sheriff's office sat on Main Street, the same old brick building where David had once worked. He parked out front and sat for a long time, staring at the doors. "You don't have to come in," he told me. "Yes, I do," I said. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and floor wax. The young deputy at the front desk looked up, startled. "Mr. Hayes, I thought you retired 20 years ago." David managed a faint smile. "I did. But I have something I need to set right." They took us into a small office. The sheriff, a tall man with a kind face, listened as David spoke. He told him everything about the night at the lake, about Fowler, about the cover-up that had stolen a woman's life and a child's truth. Leah sat beside him, silent, tears glinting in her eyes. When he finished, the sheriff leaned back. "That's a hell of a story, David, and a hell of a confession." David nodded. "I'm not asking for mercy, just the record corrected." The sheriff sighed. "I'll reopen it. Fowler passed 10 years ago, but if what you're saying checks out, we'll clear Lydia Harper's name." Leah's hand tightened around the folder. "Thank you," she whispered. When we left the station, David's shoulders seemed lighter, though his face was pale. "She deserved that," he said quietly. "I should have done it sooner." Leah touched his arm. "You did it now. That's what matters." Back at the house, the three of us sat in the living room. No one knew what to say. The air felt strange, like grief and peace tangled together. Finally, Leah asked, "What happens to us now?" David looked at her for a long time before answering. "I don't know. But I'd like to know you if you'll let me." Leah's lips trembled. "You're my father. I don't know what that means yet, but maybe we can start there." He smiled weakly. "That's more than I deserve." As evening fell, Leah helped me cook dinner. We moved quietly, almost like old friends. She told me about her mother, how Lydia loved lilies, how she sang in the car, how she'd wanted to buy a house by the ocean. Listening to her felt like meeting Lydia myself. After dinner, Leah and David sat at the piano by the window. He hadn't touched it in years. His hands hovered uncertainly before pressing a few soft chords. Leah joined him, humming a tune I recognized instantly, Fleetwood Mac's Landslide. It was rough, imperfect, but somehow beautiful. When they finished, David wiped his eyes. "She used to hum that while we worked," he said. Leah smiled. She hummed it while she cooked. I think it was her way of saying she still believed in tomorrow. The room was quiet again, but the silence wasn't heavy this time. It felt like something healing. Later that night I stood by the lake. The moonlight shimmered over the surface, calm and silver. I thought about the box I'd pulled from the depths, about the years we'd spent pretending everything was fine. David came up behind me, his footsteps soft in the grass. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm just thinking," I replied. "About what?" "How truth can rot when it's buried too long," I said. "But when it finally comes up, it breathes again." He slipped his hand into mine. "Do you think we'll ever be okay?" I squeezed his fingers gently. "Maybe not the way we were, but maybe the way we're meant to be now." For the first time in years, he smiled, small, tired, but real. The lake was still. The secrets were gone. And though the pain remained, so did something else. Something like peace. The next few weeks moved in slow motion, as if the house itself was learning how to breathe again. David spent his mornings sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, staring out at the lake. I watched him sometimes from the kitchen window, the way his fingers curled around the mug like it was holding him together. The sheriff called 3 days after his confession. The case was officially reopened, and Lydia Harper's name would be cleared. The newspapers in town wrote a short piece about new developments in a decades-old mystery. They didn't mention David by name, but anyone who'd lived here long enough could read between the lines. He didn't hide from it. He went into town, looked people in the eye, and answered every question they had. Some forgave him, some didn't. Leah came by almost every day. Sometimes she brought old photographs. Sometimes she brought nothing but quiet company. She had her mother's calm strength, the kind of composure that made you trust her even when she said little. One afternoon, I found her in the garden trimming the overgrown lilies by the fence. The same lilies Lydia loved. They were her favorite, she said. She said they reminded her that beauty grows even in the mud. I smiled softly. "Then it's fitting they grew here." Leah looked up at me, eyes bright. "You don't hate me, do you?" The question caught me off guard. Why would I? Because I'm the proof he wasn't faithful. Because every time you see me, you see what he hid. I knelt beside her, pressing the soil down around the roots. "You're not proof of his betrayal, Leah. You're proof of his humanity. And maybe, just maybe, you're our chance to start over." She didn't answer, but her hand brushed mine in quiet understanding. That evening we had dinner together. David, Leah, our son Michael, and his wife June. It was the first time in years our dining table was full. Michael didn't say much, but he watched Leah with curiosity. When he finally spoke, it was gentle. "So you're my sister?" Leah laughed softly, half technically. He grinned. "Half or whole your family?" For a moment I felt something shift. It wasn't the kind of forgiveness that arrives all at once. It was slower, like the thawing of winter ice. After dinner, Leah brought out a small stack of her mother's letters. "I think you should read these," she told me. I hesitated. "They're yours." "She wrote about you," Leah said. "About how she never wanted to destroy your life." I opened one carefully. The handwriting was delicate, almost hesitant. "Eleanor doesn't know. She seems kind. I hope one day she understands that love isn't always clean or fair. Sometimes it's just what keeps you breathing." I folded the letter slowly. My chest ached, but not from anger, from something gentler, sadder. "She sounds like someone who wanted peace." Leah nodded. "She did. I think she has it now." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, David came to sit beside me on the couch. He looked tired but lighter. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not walking away." I stared into the dying embers of the fireplace. "I thought about it," I admitted. "But then I realized walking away wouldn't undo anything. We've both spent enough of our lives running from the truth." He sighed. "I wish I could go back and change it all." "You can't," I said, "but you can make what's left matter." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Leah wants to have a small memorial for her mother by the lake. She asked if we'd come." "Of course," I said. "It's time." That Sunday, the three of us met by the water. The lake was calm, the air cool and clear. Leah carried a small bouquet of lilies, and David held the silver locket he'd kept all those years. She knelt by the shore, setting the flowers gently on the surface. They floated together white against the dark water. She always wanted peace, Leah whispered. David stepped forward, holding the locket in his hand. I've carried this for 40 years, he said. It's time it went home. He tossed it gently into the lake. The ripples spread outward, soft and slow, until the locket disappeared beneath the surface. Leah slipped her arm through mine. Thank you for letting me do this, she said. I squeezed her hand. Thank you for finding the truth. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the quiet lap of water against the shore. Then David said, I used to think the lake took things from me, but maybe it just held them until I was ready to face them. Leah smiled. Maybe it's been waiting for you to forgive yourself? He nodded, eyes wet. I'm trying. That night, back at the house, we sat together in the living room, the three of us. The air felt lighter, the silence no longer heavy. Charlie lay at our feet, his tail thumping softly against the rug. I looked at David and Leah, two halves of a broken story, slowly learning how to heal, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I knew there would still be hard days ahead. Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once, it's a road you walk every day. But for the first time, it felt like we were all walking it together. Spring came slowly that year. The ice melted from the lake in thin, glimmering sheets, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth and pine. It felt like the world itself was waking up, and somehow, so were we. David started fixing things again, small things like the old birdhouse by the porch and the fence by the garden. I think he needed to build something, anything, after so many years of breaking things apart in silence. Sometimes Leah helped him. Watching them work side by side, I saw an ease in him I hadn't seen in decades. They didn't talk much while they worked, but they didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, like a space finally at rest. One afternoon, Leah stayed after dinner. We sat on the porch while David cleaned up inside. The sun was setting behind the trees, turning the lake gold. She sipped her tea and said, You know, I never had a family dinner like that growing up. My mom worked nights and I'd eat cereal on the couch. Tonight felt different. I smiled softly. Different can be good. She nodded. It was. Thank you for letting me in, even after everything. I looked at her, the curve of her jaw, the strength in her gaze, and saw pieces of both her parents in her face. You didn't do anything wrong, Leah. You just showed up when we needed truth the most. She looked down, voice barely above a whisper. I used to hate him, you know. I thought he was the reason my mother was gone. I still don't know if I can forgive him completely, but I think I understand him now. That's something, right? It's everything I said. Understanding is what forgiveness grows out of. David came out then, drying his hands with a towel. You two conspiring against me out here. Leah smiled. Just trying to decide if you're worth keeping around. He laughed, really laughed for the first time in years. The sound startled me. It felt good. It felt real. When she left later that night, David stood at the door long after her car disappeared down the road. She's strong, he said quietly. Stronger than I ever was. She got that from her mother, I replied. He nodded. And maybe a little from you. For a while, life settled into something almost normal. Michael and June started visiting more often. They brought their 2 kids, and the house filled with laughter again. One afternoon, while we baked cookies, little Emma asked about the woman in the photo on the mantel, Lydia, in her uniform. She was someone who made the world a little better, I told her. David added softly, and someone who taught me what it costs to tell the truth. Emma just nodded, satisfied, and went back to decorating her cookies. Sometimes I think children understand things better than we do, they just don't make it complicated. That evening, after the family left, I found David on the porch again. The sun was dipping low and his hands rested on the railing stained with sawdust and age. "You did good today," I said. He smiled faintly. "Feels strange, doesn't it, having everyone here again? Like nothing ever happened." "Something did happen," I said, "and we survived it." He nodded thoughtful. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I'd told you the truth back then?" I looked out at the lake. The surface reflected the pink of the setting sun. "I think we'd have broken. Maybe for good. But maybe we would have found our way back sooner, too." He sighed. "I'll never stop being sorry." "I know," I said gently, "but you don't have to live inside that anymore. Guilt's just another kind of prison." He turned toward me. "And forgiveness." "Forgiveness is the key," I said. We stood there in silence, listening to the frogs begin their evening chorus. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Lydia's badge, the one Leah had returned after the memorial. "She said it belonged here," he murmured. "Said Lydia would have wanted it close to home." He set it gently on the porch rail, where the last of the light caught it. For a moment it glowed like a coin in the sun. "Do you think she forgives me?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. The question felt too big for words. Finally, I said, "Maybe forgiveness isn't about what she thinks anymore. Maybe it's about what you choose to carry forward." He nodded, eyes misty. "Then I'll carry her memory. And you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked down to the lake barefoot in the cool grass. The water was still moonlight rippling over its surface. I closed my eyes and imagined Lydia's locket lying down there nestled among the stones. It didn't feel like a grave anymore. It felt like something laid to rest. I whispered into the night. We did what we could. Behind me, I heard the door creak. David's voice carried softly over the air. "You coming in?" "In a minute," I said. He didn't move closer. He just stood there watching me the way he used to in the early years, before the secrets, before the silence. For the first time in a long while, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we'd find our way back to each other, not as who we once were, but as who we'd become. Because forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about learning how to live with it and still find something worth loving in what remains. Summer came soft and steady that year. The air smelled of wildflowers and rain, and the lake shimmered under the sunlight like it had been waiting for us to notice it again. Life felt quieter, not empty, but peaceful, like the kind of silence you earn after years of noise. David and I began to fall into a rhythm again. Morning coffee on the porch. Evening walks with Charlie by the water. The world hadn't forgiven us, not completely, but that no longer mattered as much. We were learning to forgive ourselves. Leah came by often. Sometimes she brought groceries, sometimes just her presence. One afternoon she arrived with a photo album, something she'd been working on. "I thought we should keep everything together," she said. We sat in the living room flipping through pages, pictures of Lydia, of David in uniform, of Leah as a little girl with scraped knees and a crooked smile. Then toward the end there were new photos of all of us, the lake behind us, the lilies blooming by the fence, Michael's kids laughing in the yard. I traced a photo of David holding Emma on his lap, both of them laughing. "You're giving us back our years," I told her. Leah smiled softly. "Maybe just reminding you they're still here." That night after dinner, we sat out by the lake. The air was warm, the kind of warm that makes you nostalgic for things you didn't even realize you missed. Fireflies blinked in the grass and the water was calm enough to see the reflection of the stars. David said, "You know, I used to think that lake was cursed, that every time I looked at it, it'd pull me under again." I glanced at him. "And now?" He looked out at the silver ripples. "Now, I think it kept me alive. It made me remember what I'd buried." Leah leaned back in her chair. "Maybe it wasn't trying to punish you. Maybe it was waiting for you to come clean." He chuckled softly. "You sound like your mother." She'd like to think that Leah said, smiling. We stayed there until the crickets grew louder and the moon rose high. David reached over and took my hand. His touch was light, uncertain, but warm. I didn't pull away. I keep thinking about how we started, he said quietly. That summer in '75, dancing in your mother's living room to Fleetwood Mac. You wore that yellow dress that never fit right. I laughed softly. You spilled beer on it, remember? He smiled. You said I ruined it. I told you I'd buy you another one. And you said, you can't replace what's already perfect. I turned to him, tears stinging my eyes. We weren't perfect, David. No, he said. But maybe that's what makes it worth fighting for. Leah stood brushing off her jeans. I should get going, she said gently. Thank you for dinner. David hugged her, something hesitant but full of love. You'll come back soon. Always, she said. I've got too much family here now. After she left, I stayed by the lake a little longer. The water lapped quietly against the dock, steady and rhythmic like breathing. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe too. David joined me after a while. He handed me a folded piece of paper. It's from her, he said. Lydia. I never had the courage to read it before. I hesitated, then opened it. The ink had faded, but her words were still clear. David. If you're reading this, it means you've finally stopped running. Don't hate yourself for surviving. Some people are meant to stay and fix what's left. That's your job now. Take care of them for both of us. I folded the letter and held it close. She forgave you a long time ago, I whispered. He nodded slowly. Maybe it's time I did too. We stood together at the edge of the dock. The moon reflected on the water, the same moon that had watched him throw that box all those months ago. The same moon that watched me pull it back. And somehow the same light now seemed softer, kinder. Do you ever wonder, David said quietly, what happens when the truth finally stops hurting? I looked at him, my voice steady. That's when it starts healing. He smiled, and for a moment the years between us didn't feel so heavy anymore. The next morning, I woke to sunlight pouring through the curtains. I went downstairs, made coffee, and opened the kitchen window. The breeze carried the scent of lilies from the garden. For the first time, it didn't remind me of loss. It reminded me of love that had survived the storm. Later that day, Leah and Michael came over with the kids. We had lunch in the yard, laughter spilling across the grass. When the children asked to hear a story, I told them about the summer their grandfather and I first met, about Fleetwood Mac and yellow dresses, and the kind of love that endures mistakes. And when they ran off to play, Leah sat beside me and said, You know, you should write this all down. I smiled. Maybe I already have. She tilted her head. What would you call it? I looked out at the lake, the water calm, the sun glinting off the surface like scattered glass, and said, maybe something simple, something about truth and love, and what it takes to survive both. She nodded. That sounds right. As evening came, I walked down to the dock one last time. The locket was somewhere down there, resting among the stones, but I didn't feel the urge to reach for it anymore. Some things are meant to stay where they lie, not as secrets, but as part of the story. I whispered goodnight, Lydia, and turned back toward the house where my family was waiting. Because forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it builds a bridge to tomorrow. And for the first time, I was ready to cross it.